Johnny Tremain, Chapter 2, Part 2. Try to find answers to the following questions while you read. Why is Johnny constantly upset with Dove's work? In particular, why does Johnny say so or do so in this part of the chapter? Number 2, what is Mr. Lapham's warning regarding Johnny's behavior toward Dove? Number 3, why won't Mr. Lapham allow Johnny to finish the sugar basin though it is due the next day? And number 4, what does Mrs. Lapham say about this? Part 2. By Saturday noon, Johnny, following Mr. Revere's advice and his curve, had got the model of the handle exactly right. He could tell with his eyes closed. It felt perfect. He rapidly made a duplicate, for when the molten silver was poured in on the wax, it would melt and float away. So he made a model for each handle. Now, no matter how long it took him, and if all went well, it should not be too long, he must get his handles cast, cleaned, and soldered to the basin itself, which Mr. Lapham had made. Of course, on Sunday the shop would be locked up all day, the furnace cold. Mr. Lapham would, as always, escort his household, dressed in Sunday best, to the Cockerel Church, and after that back for a cold dinner. Whether they went again or not to afternoon meeting, the master left for each to decide. He himself always went. Madge and Dorcas usually entertained their beau. Mrs. Lapham slept. Scylla would take Isana out along the little beach. Johnny, Dove, and Dusty were apt to steal off for a swim, although Mr. Lapham had no idea of it. He thought they sat quietly at home, and that Johnny read the Bible out loud to them. So Sunday was out. But if he got up at 3 or 4 Monday morning, he would have time to clean his work before he took it over to Mr. Hancock at 7. After Saturday dinner, Mr. Lapham, as usual, prepared for a snooze, stretched out in the one armchair in the shop with his basket over his head to keep off the flies. Perhaps Johnny's tyranny during the week had irritated the old gentleman, who never believed it made the least difference to anyone when anything was finished. "Dove! Dusty!" Johnny was yelling. "Build up the furnace! Fetch in charcoal! Hi, you lazy good-for-nothing dish mops!" Dove ran out to the coal house. There was a queer, pleased look on his face when he returned. "Charcoal all gone, Master Johnny." "Gone?" "Yep. I haven't said anything because you always like to take charge of things like that round here. Get a basket, quick! Run to Mr. Hamlin over on Long Wharf. Try Mrs. Hitchburn down on Hitchburn's Wharf. You've got to get charcoal. Hurry!" Dove did not hurry. It was getting on toward sunset when at last he came back, pushing his big basket on a wheelbarrow. It was the worst-looking charcoal Johnny had ever seen. "This isn't what we silversmiths use. This is fourth-rate stuff. Fit for iron, maybe. You know that, Dove." "Nah, not me. I don't know anything. See? You're always telling me. I want willow charcoal." "You never said so." "I'll go myself, but this delay means we'll be working in lamplight, and up to midnight. You are the stupidest animal God ever made, if he made you, which I doubt. Why your mother didn't drown you when you were a pup, I can't imagine. Come Lord's Day, and I have a spare moment, I'm going to give you such a hiding for your infernal low-down skulking tricks, you'll be—" The basket over Mr. Lapham's head moved. He laid it down. "Boys," he said mildly, "you quarrel all the time." Johnny, in angry mouthfuls, told him what he thought about Dove and the charcoal, and threw in a cutting remark about Dusty. The old master said, "Dove, I want to speak to Johnny alone." And then, "Johnny, I don't want you to always be writing them boys so hard. Dove tries, but he's stupid. Ain't his fault, is it? If God had wanted him bright, he would have made him that way. We are all poor worms. You're getting above yourself, like I tried to point out to you. God is going to send you a dire punishment for your pride. Yes, sir. One trouble with you is you haven't been up against any boys as good as yourself. Or better, maybe. Because you're the best young one in this shop, or on Hancock's wharf. You think you're the best one in the world. Johnny was so anxious to be on with the work, tedious delayed by Dove's tricks, he hardly listened. And boy, don't you get all fretted up over what's after all nothing but an order for silver. It's sinful to let yourself go so over mundane things. Now, I want you to sit quietly and memorize them verses I had you read about pride. Work's over for the day. What? Yep. It always was the old-fashioned way to start the Lord's Day, at sunset on Saturday, and I've decided to re-establish the habit in my house. Mr. Lapham, we've got to work this evening. We've promised Mr. Hancock. I doubt God cares even a little bit whether Mr. Hancock has any silver. It's better to break faith with him, isn't it, than with the Lord? Johnny was tired. His head was ringing. His hands shook a little. He walked out of the shop, slamming the door after him, and stormed into the kitchen. He knew Mrs. Lapham did not take much stock in her father-in-law's pious ways. She and all 4 girls were in the kitchen. Madge was frying cornmeal, Dorcas wringing out a cheesecloth, Scylla was setting the table, and Isana playing with the cat. Mrs. Lapham looked at him. "Boy, have you seen a ghost?" Johnny sat and told his story. He was beyond his customary abusive eloquence. The girls stared at him with piteous mouths open. Mrs. Lapham's jaw set grimly. "Dorcas, shut that door. Don't let your grandpa hear. Johnny, how many more work hours will you need?" 7, maybe. I can get 2 Monday morning. You shall have them. Sabbath or no Sabbath, that sugar basin is going to be done on time. I'm not letting any old-fashioned, fussy notions upset the best order we've had for 10 years. And if Mr. Hancock is pleased, he may come again and again. I can't have my poor fatherless girls starve just to please Grandpa. Listen now to me. Sunday afternoon, Mr. Lapham was not only going to the second service, as usual, but there was to be a meeting of the deacons, a cold supper afterward, and a prayer service at the pastor's. That's where you get them 5 hours, Johnny. Tomorrow afternoon. Johnny knew that working on the Sabbath was against the law as well as against all his religious training. He might very well go to the stocks or to hell for it. But when Mrs. Lapham said, "Darest to, Johnny?" he said, "I darest." Not a word to the old gentleman, mind. Not a word. Girls, if you so much as peep— "Oh, no, Ma!" Dove and Dusty were to be bribed into service by the promise of delivering the basin to Mr. Hancock when done. He always gave money to the boys who brought things to the house. Mrs. Lapham was breathing hard, but she had the matter well in hand. It was settled. "Isana," she said quietly, "you call Grandpa and the boys into supper. Scylla, run down cellar and fetch cold ale." Her mouth, and the folds about it, even her nose and eyes, were like iron.